You're listening to The Higher Ed Marketer, the podcast for marketing professionals in higher education. Join us every week as we talk to the industry's greatest minds in student recruitment, donor relations, marketing trends, new technologies, and much more. If you're looking for conversations centered around where marketing in higher ed is going, this podcast is for you. Let's get into the show.
Well, welcome again to another great episode of the Higher Ed Marketer podcast. I'm Zach Coffin, the Vice President of the Higher Ed Marketer, and we are right in the middle of our Faith Leaders mini-series, and we are having an incredible conversation with faith leaders from around the country on that intersection of Christian faith and higher ed. We have had some great conversations, and today's conversations with Dr. David Hogue, the 8th President of the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, the CCCU. And Bart, it was a really, really broad but yet helpful conversation.
Yeah, I really appreciate David being on the show today. Being a former president of Warner University down in Florida, he's kind of known for advancing this Christ-centered education and his strategic leadership and things like that. But he kind of came with a lot of practicality, a lot of very specific things that we ought to be thinking about as leaders at faith-based institutions, and I just really appreciate him kind of unpacking some of what's going on within DC with advocacy, but also some of the things that have just surprising facts about Christian higher education that we in the schools need to be promoting about ourselves and not be ashamed of that. So it's really exciting to have him on the show today.
Yeah, it was a fantastic conversation. I so appreciated, just to echo what you're saying, Bart, I appreciated the way that he was able to unpack the advocacy side of what CCCU does, and it's so winsome in how he does that. So I know that the audience is going to love this conversation. And so let's go ahead and jump in to our conversation today with Dr. David Hogue. Well, thanks everybody again for joining us for another great episode of the Higher Ed Marketers mini-series with faith leaders. And again, we've got David Hogue, president of CCCU, with us today. David, we're so privileged and honored to have you with us today. And we've got the long-standing tradition to ask each guest to share something that they have learned recently or something interesting. So why don't we jump in and we'll get the conversation started.
All right. Well, first, Zach and Bart, thanks so much for having me. As I thought about that question, I think I have to lead with some AI stuff because, that is all about Bart and Zach and some of the work you guys do on the marketing side of things. And one of the things I've been doing recently, because I speak to a lot of groups and sometimes different ages, sometimes I'm speaking more to students, sometimes I'm speaking to other colleagues that are presidents. And one of the things I've been doing is I pull my notes together for like a presentation. Sometimes I run it through a few different AIs just to kind of make sure that my illustrations are on target. Or sometimes I'm like totally blown away. Like I was doing a chapel message and I was doing something on the parable of the sower. And I put my message into it and said, I want a better illustration that can connect with students. And oh my gosh, I was just blown away. And so I just think that it is just awesome, these tools that we can use to make our jobs better, but even make our jobs even smarter.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Yeah, it's amazing, especially on the sermon prep side, how helpful AI can be, because I think we've all can resonate with that idea that we get to a point in either an illustration or trying to make that point, and something just isn't clicking, and we just need a little bit more ideation help. So I appreciate that a lot, man. That's great. So you're the 8th president of CCCU, and for those of folks who are not familiar with the work that you guys are doing, give us a rundown of kind of who CCCU is, the work that you guys are doing, DC, the whole deal.
Sure. So we're the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities. We have 180 institutions worldwide, about 150 right here in the U.S., 600,000 students, about 15,000 faculty. And it's a very strong group of evangelical Christian schools, 28 different denominations that are represented. And so we do different leadership training and faith integration work with folks. And then we do a lot of advocacy work, which takes place in Washington, D.C. And let me tell you, there's a lot going on in that topic right now.
Yeah, I believe that with all the things at play right now, I'm sure that you guys are busy as you've ever been. And so with that in mind, can you describe, like, as you have 150 schools across here in the United States, 28 denominations, how would you currently describe the current state of Christian higher ed, Christian colleges, universities in 2025? What's kind of current state?
Wow. Since we're the whole United States, you're going to have a variety of different ways in which schools are performing. And so, for instance, geography does matter. So some states have a higher number of students that are graduating from high school. So those numbers are a little easier for recruitment. And then there's other parts of the country where it's slowed down quite a bit. And geography also matters as it pertains to how do states help support private education. You know, I most recently, when I was president of Warner University, I was in Florida, and the state had a very generous grant towards any private education that you could even use at a Christian school. And so that helped make it a lot more affordable. So geography kind of comes into play on that, both from how many students are available and how the state supports them. But overall, one of the things that I found is my schools that are doubling down on Jesus, doubling down on their Christian mission, they're doing really well because families are looking for that type of environment for their son or daughter.
It's so interesting that you would point that out, because I think Bart and I have seen that on the Kaler Solutions side, where I think we've gone through this season where I think, if we're really honest, there was some timidness potentially in who we are, what we were saying. You know, there was such a cultural uproar that there was a timidity that people functioned under. With that idea of that courage that's required, like, talk a little bit to the courage that you're seeing well up as people are doubling down, because I think that's a huge piece to unlock for people.
So if you guys think about from the marketing perspective, when institutions talk about who they are, if they're not clear about who they are and their mission, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like lukewarm. And we know what the Bible says about, you want to be hot. You don't want to be cold, and you don't want to be lukewarm. So what I'm finding right now is families are looking to make maybe one of the most expensive, it's not really expensive, but it's one of the most important investments that they're going to make, is they try to decide where their son or daughter is going to go to school. And that family's probably going to have to sacrifice a little bit. They really like clear messages. And then at the same time, when you see all the chaos that's kind of happening in, I'll just call it in education overall. And that's one of the challenges that Christian schools have to kind of get over. You're seeing protests at some private universities and public universities across the whole United States. And you're not seeing that at our Christian schools. Right. Our folks are gathering for revivals and baptisms and chapel. And so our families are looking for that type of gathering and that type of being on fire for the Lord.
It's so good. Bart, can you
That's really interesting.
Too?
Yeah, a lot of times people ask me, because I do a lot of work across a lot of different institutions. So they'll say, so what are you seeing right now, Bart? I mean, how's everybody's numbers? What's it looking like for the fall? And what I typically tell them is, well, the strong are getting stronger and the weak are getting weaker.
Very
That's
wise.
unfortunate, and I hate to say that. But as some institutions are growing and then others are, we just saw a couple weeks ago starting to announce closings and things. What do you think are some of the defining factors that are separating these thriving institutions? We touched on a little bit, because I think that what you said there about leaning into your faith and planting that flag, and we had Janice Suppley on the podcast a few months ago from Cedarville University, and I think they've done a great job, and that's been over the course of a decade. that they said, this is who we
Absolutely.
are, boom, this is our flag, this is where we're going. But help me understand, what are you seeing any of those other defining factors that are playing into that?
Sure. So some others, I'm going to even talk about our boards. So there's a board of trustees or board of directors that lead the institutions, and they really have kind of the fiduciary responsibility for that institution. And, as I'm seeing some of these schools that are wavering or just not doing very well, I think a lot of times it goes back to their board leadership. So the most important thing a board does is hire the president. And, that president needs to be in sync with the vision and the mission of the institution. And then from that vantage point, the president hires then the team that's going to kind of rally together to make that happen. And so what happens sometimes is boards aren't really looking at some different trends, Bart. So think about all the admissions work that you do. And if you're starting to see declining numbers or they're not hitting their fiscal budget, that should start to be some of those flags should start to be like indicators that maybe we're having an issue. And then they need to be asking some tougher questions to the leadership to really see what that looks like. And unfortunately, sometimes folks don't really get after it right away, because as you start to have that take place year after year after year, then you start to have major financial issues, and that can lean towards a closing.
Yeah, and I think that goes really into, we've been using the term a lot lately of just having courageous leadership. Being able to say and recognize, hey, something doesn't smell right, something doesn't look right. Let's ask the questions, let's poke that and see what happens. Because I think it's way too easy just to say, well, that's really not, I don't want to be that kind of person. And I think that we have to lean into that courageous leadership. Maybe speak to that for a moment.
Well, Bart, one of the things that, to me, it comes to courage and leadership during these challenging times. We don't want to necessarily keep doing them the way we've done them for like 50 years, if you think about it. So let me tell you some innovative things that I've been doing. I've started to have some conversations with some of our denominational schools. And our schools have to find more margin in their budget, so that they can accomplish their mission. So I'm starting to talk to schools to think about, what if you started to do some collaboration with some other like-minded schools? Like, what if the back office side of what you do at your institution was done with another place? So think about this. If you have, I'll just call it denomination A, that has 4 institutions and maybe a total of 5,000 students. What if all your finance things were pulled together and you had one CFO? What if the financial aid area was pulled together? Or what about your learning management system? Can you imagine if you put that whole catalog together? Then all of a sudden, you're going to start to see thousands of dollars of savings. And I think doing things like that will help preserve kind of the fiscal side of the institutions, because as times get tighter and tougher, we're going to have to do some of those things differently if we want to really be viable for the future.
Yeah, I think that creativity, we have to lean into the creative solutions. And then I think we have to also look at the tools that are available to us. You mentioned AI earlier, and we're all about that. It's more than just making your emails sound better, folks.
Amen.
It's one of those things that you can get into real data analysis and really make some big choices and big decisions quicker. So I'm not going to get into that because I could preach for the next 3 hours on that. But just the idea. So as you kind of, let's go back for a second. I know you were most recently president at Warner University in Florida. You have seen how students are interacting. You're getting more of a view of that throughout multiple member institutions. You've been on a tour recently at chapels and commencements and things like that. So how do you see students and maybe even their families engaging differently within the last 5-10 years with faith-based institutions than maybe they have before?
Well, I'm seeing families hunger for value and for places that put the value in developing the whole person and helping that person on their faith journey. And families are looking at, this is probably one of the most important decisions that they're going to make for their son or daughter. So think about it. It's going to be their network, their major, future vocation, or their calling, might even be their spouse. And I think because of the investment, families are taking it a little bit more seriously.
I would.
Absolutely. We were mentioning our conversation with Phil Cook that we had last week. Phil brought up that same thing. In each of these episodes we're having in our Faith mini-series, this idea has come up in all of our recordings so far, is that idea of that whole person, both from that career side, network side, as well as the discipleship environment and how people are thinking holistically about that. And so I think just for our listeners, I think it's easy to think about part of that equation. Some of us are maybe more business minded. Some of us may be more discipleship, environment minded, but really being able to recognize the intensity that people are feeling this and processing that. I think we just have to call that out and acknowledge that that is actually what is happening. Parents are looking at that maybe more than ever before as a key discipleship and life direction, not just go to college to get a job.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm seeing, Zach, families are also very concerned about safety. Will my son or daughter be safe? And that's a big variable now. That 5 years ago, they were more concerned about what happens if my son or daughter gets sick. Now, is my son or daughter going to be safe? And do you have this nurturing, safe environment that my son or daughter can be a part of?
It's really good.
That's great. So on the other side, when we talk about it, we talked about how are families and students and Christian families doing that. Let's flip it over. What are some of the misconceptions that maybe the general public or even the media has about Christian education? How do we begin to address those?
When I talk about our 150 member schools, I did a study the other day because it kind of tied to some of the advocacy work that we did. Do you know what our average tuition is between 150 schools? Do you want to take a stab at it? Come on, Bart. I'm going to put you on the spot.
I'll say $35,000.
I was going to say Zach? 40. I was going to say probably 52.
Guess what? 30,400. Okay.
Wow.
So you guys have both crashed and burned on that one. What do you think, Dave? And you know what? That's a big deal, because if you think about this misnomer is, can I afford it? And so I even included some large schools that are governing members like Pepperdine, Samford, Baylor, and we're still at 30,400. Okay, so I want to give you one more shot to redeem yourself. Average discount rate.
That one I'm going to say, I hope 30 to 35%.
I was going to say 45.
So Bart, I don't know if you want to think about a different occupation, but you're just not even. It's 52. So I'm with you, Bart. You want to say it's 35.
Yeah.
That's the right thing for the CFO to hear, but that's not reality. So now when I say discount rate, that would include all scholarships. So it wouldn't just be, just a discount. That would be all financial aid, all in 52%. So maybe you guys are going to need to do a separate podcast with some folks in the admissions and financial aid area to work on some of this data.
Awesome. Oh, that's so really fun. Good. But I think you bring up a really good point, though, because the solution of Christian higher education is an affordable option.
Very.
And I think that is one of the options that
very affordable. And everybody starts to think, oh, I can't afford that. And it's private. And it's private, and it's going to be too expensive. And so to me, this is almost one of the most important things to get across in this podcast. It's affordable. Now, you may have to look and find those, but this is 150 schools. The average is 30,400. that shows great value and an affordable price.
Well, I think
and as marketers, we need to get that message out. So
absolutely. You stepped into the CCCU presidency in 2024 here, so we're still early in the game. But what have been some of your top priorities out of the gate here?
So my 3 priorities. The first one is strengthening membership, and it's not just about bringing in new members. It's how can I come alongside of some members based on some of the needs they might have. So, for instance, I might have to direct them to some folks that can help them on the admissions front, or possibly with fundraising, or some folks that are specializing in Christian higher education financing. And so that's the first thing. How can we help support them? Second is faith integration and leadership development. We have all these millennials finishing with their PhDs, and they're going to be the next generation of faculty. And we need to make sure that they're equipped to integrate their faith and their discipline and disciple these students, because, again, we want them to come right alongside of these students and help them develop the whole person. And then the third piece is the advocacy work that we do in Washington, D.C. and around the country.
So, David, I love what you're saying there, and you kind of referenced it earlier. You've got, talked about Pepperdine, Baylor, we've got Biola, we've got all kinds of various diverse institutions under the CCCU umbrella. Mm-hmm. So help me understand, how are you connecting those presidents, the marketers, the academic leaders across such a diverse group of institutions?
Well, the first thing we do to connect is we stay biblically focused and have a Christ-centered worldview, however we approach whatever the issue may be. We have very active commissions. And what I mean by that is, so we would have the Enrollment Officers Commission. And that's a group of 12 individuals that help kind of chart out all the leadership development and programming for them at our different conferences, webinars, and different activities. And so we have a series of about 16 different commissions that do that. Now, as it pertains to the presidents, I have a monthly communication to them, the leading voice, and you don't have to be a president to get that. So if folks send me an email afterwards and they'd like to get that communication, I'd be more than willing to do that. We also have a government relations communication that goes out, and then our e-advance. So there's a series of different ways that we try to stay kind of electronically connected to all the different groups. But then once a year, we normally have a large gathering. I think, Bart, you were just at one of our multi-academic conferences.
Yeah.
We're preparing for our forum. It's going to be in Dallas the end of January.
Yep.
We'll probably have 1,500 people at that event, and that's a big deal. But there's always different annual opportunities. This summer, we have several different leadership opportunities for folks. We got 2 weeks of leadership opportunities in June. I'm doing a big one for new presidents. We have a lot of new presidents this year.
Yeah, there are.
And I think it's so important to come alongside of them as they're trying to figure out how you move things forward, because they need to be prepared for what's right around the corner.
Yeah. And I love the fact that you're talking about those different initiatives. And we talked about Phil Cook earlier with NACAP. And I know one of the initiatives and partnerships you're doing that is going to be kind of revealed and announced, and the results are going to happen at the forum is the survey. So tell us a little bit about what's going on with that.
Sure. Well, the CCCU, back when Phil and I were both admissions counselors, they were doing all this different research, and
Right.
You recruit a little differently now, as you know. It's changed a little bit. But that data is so important as we try to prepare our admissions teams to do their jobs for the future. And so I think this is the first time since 2009. And I think Phil has it's 65 institutions right now that are participating. And I think that's going to be a game changer to really give our teams, our frontline teams, great data for them to do their job.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. I know we're a part of that, and honored to be a part of helping some of those schools participate. So thanks for sharing that.
So good. David, I've really appreciated all the different resources that you've mentioned, the partnership connections. And then I think another distinctive that you've alluded to is just the advocacy side of CCCU. And I know that right now there's a lot going on in DC. And for those that may not understand, can you kind of Help
Sure.
shape that for us. Give us some insight of what's really going on and the work that you guys are doing.
Sure. The first area of advocacy is religious liberty. And someone might say, what's religious liberty? That is, what that does is that allows a Christian institution to be able to hire people that believe what they believe. So, we have different denominations and so forth. And all of our institutions kind of have a statement of faith or what they believe, or it's tied to a denomination. And so what we do on the Hill is we advocate to make sure they're able to practice their religious beliefs and hire people that believe what they believe. And right now, I don't feel too much pressure on that front. Right now, most of our advocacy work deals with the legislation. And people are probably wondering, what does that mean and this and that? So right now, the biggest challenge we have deals with higher ed finance. And that ties to like student loans and Pell and research grants and those types of things. And so if you're watching the news at all, you're probably hearing things about the big, beautiful bill or reconciliation. And you're probably wondering, what does that mean for me? I'm in admissions. Or what does that mean for me? And I'm a college president, or I'm a parent. Well, let me tell you what that means. So whenever you have all three parts of the government under control by one party, so if the House and the Senate and the White House is all the same party, they're able to be a little bit more agile in how they pass different legislation. And so one of the things they're working on right now is they want to cut 1.5 trillion out of the budget. Mm-hmm. And by making those cuts in this reconciliation process, it allows them to spend the money in a different way. Now, why am I concerned about that? Well, the Education and House Workforce Committee basically just went through a markup period, and they want to cut $350 billion. Yes, that was a billion, not a million. And a lot of that is going to come from loan reform and a lot of major changes. So many of our schools give out like Parent Plus loans and Grad Plus loans, and those will go away. And those would make a huge impact on many of our institutions. The other thing they're wanting to do is like change how the repayment works. So we have a lot of people that get into Christian service, and they choose IDR, which stands for Income Deferred Repayment. And so you can stretch that payment out based on how much money you make. Well, guess what? They're wanting to cut all that. And so that's what's happening in the House. And then the Senate, they only want to cut it with $1 billion. So I really like that. Only $1 billion. So what we're trying to do is represent our schools and show the value and the common good in what they bring. And so we have to educate representatives of the House and representatives of the Senate within their district the great value that their schools bring and how some of these changes would be detrimental. Now, most of my presidents, and I did as a president, we do need to make some major loan reform, but we don't need to make it as major as some of the things they're wanting to do right now.
That's really all interesting, David. And I'm just curious. I mean, you talked about the presidents, and I was at the president's conference, and I saw a lot of them go up to the Hill and meet their representatives and things like that. And I know that you all coordinate that and work with that. But as our listeners are listening to this and saying, "Oh man, I didn't realize that," how can they get involved? I mean, what are tactical ways that either that they can work with the CCCU or that they need to do on their own locally to really make sure that their voices are heard in their own institution?
Well, the first thing they need to do is, you can go on one of the government websites and look up to figure out who is your the member of the House of Representatives for you, whether it's Democrat or Republican. You need to let your voice know what you believe and what your institution really does in that area to tell the story. And so I'll give you a great example, Bart. I took one of our presidents at Faulkner University in Alabama, and they serve a large population with like physical therapy, occupational therapy, mental health to veterans. They do like 36,000 visits free for these folks within their community. So they have a large population of graduate students in this area. Well, one of the things the government's wanting to do with some of these changes is charge schools a risk-sharing payment. And so Faulkner University's risk-sharing was going to be $1.5 million. That's a big number. And so as I met with that president, we were meeting with one of their senators. And Senator Tuberville, he's the former football coach of Auburn. And I said, Coach, do you know what Auburn's risk-sharing payment would be? And he had no idea. And he sits on the Senate Education Committee. And I said, it's $1.5 million. And I said, Coach, do you think that's fair that this small private school that's doing all this great work in the community is penalized at the same level as that major university? And even he said, oh my goodness, that just doesn't even make any sense at all. Yeah. And so there's so much confusion, and that's where we really feel that we need to tell our stories to congressional leaders, both in the House and in the Senate, so that we can stop some of this that could really be devastating to our sector.
Yeah, it's interesting when you hear all of these stories because they conjure up all kinds of different emotions. For some people, that gets them really excited. Other people, it can bring some fear and those types of things. But what are you seeing on the horizon that's giving you the most hope for the future of Christian education and kind of our voice in that national conversation? Like, where are you seeing, where do you look across, year, 2 year, 5 years from now that you're just like, man, I can just see so much potential for Christian higher ed?
I have Zach, I've been on probably 30 campuses since I became president in September. And I am just blown away how God is at work in these schools all across, from coast to coast, whether it's up in Seattle or whether it's down in Florida. I'm seeing God at work. I'm seeing kids hungry for Jesus. And it is just incredible to see these lives being changed. Again, students aren't protesting on our campuses. They're getting excited for Jesus. And I just think there's incredible stories that we need to keep telling that are happening on all these campuses.
Love that. I think that's exactly right.
So good. As we're bringing this conversation here to a close, we always like to ask our guests for one final piece of advice. And it could be on any of the topics that we've talked about today, like any piece of advice. So from the national conversation to even locally, what's one piece of advice you would give our listeners to help them engage with this topic of leadership?
Oh, maybe don't ask Bart to guess certain percentages. Might be the first one. That's the first one. Get your data together, Bart. No, I think I have this saying: smarter, not harder. And whether it's AI or whether it's other resources, whether it's partnering with like-minded people, we need to be smarter and find a better path and clearer path in all the work we do, whether you're doing admissions or whether you're doing marketing, whether you're the president. It's not sustainable unless you find some other ways to really do the job right.
So good.
Love that.
Awesome. Well, if there's some of our listeners, I have no doubt will want to get in contact with you, want to consider joining CCCU and the work that you guys are doing. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you guys or to check CCCU out?
Sure. Our website is cccu.org, and you'll find me on there, and my contact information is there. You'll also see my team, who's more than able to help you. You'll see all of our conferences and events and activities. You can contact us. We'd be glad to get you on some of our different email lists. And you can also find me on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
It's fantastic. Well, thank you, Dr. Hogue, for today's conversation. I think for me, it was such an important connection between kind of what's going on the ground and then just the advocacy work that you guys are doing. Because I think it's really easy for us to be so in the trenches that we don't realize there's this whole other thing that's going on that we've got to have. We have to have understanding and really own our own understanding of what's going on and really speak up. So I really appreciate your expertise today and just the work that you guys are doing. So thank you so much.
Glad we could help. Anytime we'd be more than willing to help you out.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. Well, thank you everybody again for tuning in to the Higher Ed Marketer podcast, and specifically our Faith Leaders mini series. And so we just want to continue to encourage you that if you are finding this content helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, share with a friend, leave us a review. We would love to connect with you, and we'd love to get to know you more. So if you are on LinkedIn, be sure to find us on LinkedIn. We'd love to have you join our community over there. We're continuing the conversation there, sharing resources and all types of different ways to up your higher ed marketing game. So we'd love to connect with you there. And the Higher Ed Marketer podcast is powered by Kaler Solutions, who is your go-to partner for higher ed mission fit marketing strategies, enrollment, and branding needs. And the Faith Leadership series is sponsored by ABHE, the Association of Biblical Higher Ed, and they are an organization that's dedicated to strengthening institutions' commitment to biblical faith-based learning. So thank you all again for joining our conversation. We're so excited to continue to explore this intersection of faith and higher ed, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode. Thanks a lot and have a great week.